So the one of the points I wanted to underline in this discussion is one of the discussion that is going on right now at the international level, which is very often called as a 30-30-30. There's different ways to pronounce it. But basically the idea is to protect 30% of land and water in 2030. We have to be careful because you have other type of 30-30 also, for example, on women's rights, like having 30% of women in parliaments and so on. So we have to be careful with that. But right now, on the issue which have been presented right now, the international debate is focusing on this issue of having so many, so much land protected, which would be 30% of land and water being protected. Now, why that? This is linked to the fact that the Convention on Biodiversity, which should have met in 2020, was unable because of the COVID. So they're supposed to meet later this year, but it's still not exactly, we still don't know exactly when. So the question still needs to be fixed. But in 2020, they should have decided of a new agenda, because the previous agenda, which were called the Aichi targets, which actually were not really met, had defined the work in the field of the conservation of biodiversity. What are the targets to be reached? What are the policy to develop, so that all of the efforts of the parties to this convention go in the same direction. So now there is a need to renew this. And so the discussion is what will be the next plan? And the question of this 30-30 could be one of the key elements. It's not the entire plan, but it could be one or a flagship for the new plan. One of the objectives also is to try to have something that is a bit similar to the 1.5 degrees, so this kind of limit that we're supposed to keep below in order to avoid a too strong global warming. So there's something which is pretty easy to talk about in the public domain about climate change, although it's a very complicated issue, but at least we have a reference. And so some hope that this will become a reference also in the field of biodiversity. And it should be noted also that it's interesting that the new United States presidency, the President Joe Biden, has taken up the task that the US be leaders in that in their own country. So it's not just for the others, it's also for them. And President Biden has signed a presidential order so that 30% of federal land and water be protected in 2030. And this has triggered an incredible debate in the sense that now we see oil companies and agribusiness claiming that this is land grabbing, which is a bit unbelievable for us who are struggling against land grabbing by these companies throughout the world. So there's a sudden change of situation because of the 30-30 in the United States. But then after what we just heard, let's have a look at what does this mean, having this 30-30 as an objective. Of course, I would say one of the very first problems we have with the Convention of Biodiversity is precisely this word of biodiversity, because when we're talking about biodiversity, we are talking about an element of the ecosystem. It's the biodiversity related to ecosystems, but this hides a bit the word ecosystems as such, which is really the heart of the matter. So what do we need for ecosystems? And here we see how they are linked to a number of different elements and of different scope. And precisely one of the elements, and that was very, very well said by Sila, is you need space. Ecosystems always live in a space. So some are smaller, but then they're related to bigger ones. But you always need a certain amount of space for the ecosystems to be able to be self-sustaining and to be able to be developed. So this is one of the problems we have. One of the main ones is that there is less and less, and that's very well described a few minutes ago, there's less and less space for the natural systems to be able to just survive and develop normally. So it is becoming a real problem, and that's why more and more we're saying we need to have more space for the ecosystems to be able to function. They need time also. Ecosystems have always evolved, and that's a current argument, an argument we're hearing all the time. Yes, that's true. They have always evolved, and it's true that species even have disappeared. It's true also that you had extinctions, but that's over time. Even extinctions go through several thousands of years. It's not something that happens from one day to the other. What we are witnessing right now is a disappearance of ecosystems, of species, and so on in 2 centuries. 2 centuries. This is an incredible speed. That's never happened before in the natural world. So you need space and you need time. And of course, you need also to respect the fact that ecosystems are self-organized systems, which is probably one of the most difficult things to admit in the way we are managing all these spaces. And that's why they need space and time. And they need this in order for the integrity of the system so that it can work and functions correctly, and also that it can connect to the other ecosystems. Here on this picture, we have a beautiful bird. Probably that would be a bird that would be rather a local ones. You have much smaller birds which go through different ecosystems from the north to the south of the planet. So the ecosystems are related to each other. So they need both the integrity and the connectivity. So it's true that by putting this on the table, this idea of 30 plus 30, 30 is really raising the relevant questions, and questions that until today, and actually in many, many circumstances still today, are very difficult to raise, because we say, well, what we want is productivity, growth, 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 and then still growth. But we never talk about these other elements, about time and space for natural species and natural systems to be able to survive. But then we have to be very careful, because what must be very clear is that protected area does not always cover the entirety of an ecosystem. Very often, protected areas are just focusing on one specific area within an ecosystem. And then, for those who are familiar with protected area management, you always have the problem of what is called the bumper zones, because precisely, usually your protected area is part of a larger ecosystem, and if the ecosystem itself is collapsing, your protected area will collapse too. So then you have a problem, because the territory which is protected does not fit with the needs of the ecosystem itself. So the question when we're protecting an area is always to know, where are we doing it? Because in a number of countries, we see that, for example, the protected areas don't even cover at least the biodiversity hotspots. They are done somewhere else. So, okay, then what is the purpose? And that's precisely the second question. Why are we protecting it? And I think there was a very good example that was just mentioned a few minutes ago by Sila, which is, for example, we do it for tourism, because it's beautiful area. Yes, beautiful area does not mean yet you're managing the whole of the ecosystems. You're managing your beautiful area so people can look at it, and that's for tourism, income, and so on. But that does not fit always with the protection of the ecosystem themselves. So the two questions is where and why are absolutely crucial. And of course, the third question is, what about the rights holders around these protected areas? And purposely here, I'm taking a picture from the Stockholm Resilience Institute showing fishermen and people from on freshwater rivers, very often forgotten. And they are managing also ecosystems. They are directly related, and a lot of them have lost their revenues, have lost their incomes, have lost their livelihoods because of mismanagement, because of industrial developments, because of competition with other industrial fishing, and sometimes also because of protected areas. So again, there are always right holders in any area of the world, and we have to see how do they relate. And the very first thing is the question of self-determination. Do you have people who have always lived there, who basically are the custodians, the guardians, or we could even say the owners of that land? And very often this has been disregarded when it's a very, very crucial element. And these people have rights, and they don't only have rights because they manage well their ecosystem, they have rights because they are our equals. This is the very first thing. We're hearing again and again, for example, when we talk about indigenous people, we should protect them because they protect the land. No, we should protect them because they are our equal, and actually we should not protect them. We should just give them the same rights as we have. This is absolutely a crucial human rights issue. On the top of that, historically speaking, it is true that they are also the custodians of large ecosystem, and Sila just said it very well, and then they have probably a lot to share with us. And so that's why we need an equal dialogue, and that's what is very often missing in this situation. Then of course we have to see the livelihoods, what are the relations of the livelihoods of the people in this area, and what is the sustainability? How are we managing this together? So this is a very important question, and we can really hope that in the discussion at the Convention on the Biodiversity, once it will really it's supposed to take place in Kunming in China. Probably because of COVID, it will be done finally only online. But we hope that there will be some of these elements in the discussion on the Convention on Biodiversity, and that the relevant questions raised by 3030 will be linked to these other elements. Otherwise, we will be again losing ground. But I don't want to finish on a sad note. I want to show here what is happening in New Zealand, in Wanganui, and I suppose the next speaker can probably correct me because he has probably much more to say about this situation. But this is a very, very interesting and pioneering project. In New Zealand, the Maori in this area, around this river, have been fighting for this area for years. It's a very long story. But the end is an interesting one because a few years ago, this river, which I've not been able to pronounce its name correctly, but this river has been granted rights, which is a very first step. And what is very interesting is not only that on the paper they are being given some rights, because you also have this, which happened in India or happened in Colombia. So it's not the only place where such a thing has happened. But here they have developed a mechanism in order to manage this, where you have a representative of the Maori community and a representative of the state. So both the state and the local community are both together custodians. So what is very interesting is that they have to merge two cultures, two different ways to see this. And it's a very interesting dialogue between science and very old traditional custodian culture around this. So I think here we have a pioneering example of what can be done in order to protect an area. I thank you very much.